Now that I've created a new document, let's talk about layers and layer management. First thing I need to do is locate my layers panel. It's usually at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. I'm going to click and drag it off so that we can see it as we work on it. The first thing you'll notice is that there's always a background layer whenever you create a new document. This simply means that Photoshop has to have some kind of layer, and we can add on more layers later on, but background is always going to be the bottommost document or bottommost layer of your document. By default, it's set to white because that was the color that I chose when I created my new document. Now you can change the color of this background in a couple of different ways. The easiest way to change the color of your background is to use your your paint bucket tool. This paint bucket is located underneath your gradient tool. There it is there. And whatever you have as your foreground color, that's what it's going to fill in as. I'm going to change my foreground color to red. One click in the middle changes that background to a solid red. Now another way you can change the background color is by having it selected, hold down Shift and Delete, and this will pick up your fill options. And this is going to fill it in with whatever you want. From here you can choose the different contents. You can do a predefined black, gray, or white, or you can pick whatever color that you want. If I chose color, let's see, this is where I can dial in a specific blue. We'll say OK to those, and that will fill it in that way. So changing up the background color is not a big issue. So if you started off with the wrong color, go ahead and change it to whatever you need it to be. Another thing you can do on your background color your background layer is lock or unlock it. By default, the little lock that's on here simply means that you can add to it and paint on top of it. But if I choose my move tool and I go to move this around, it's going to give me this little warning. It's saying, hey, this background layer is locked and you can't change the stacking or the blending modes. What do we want to do? Well, if we say to convert it to a normal layer, this is going to take your layer, no longer it's a background layer, it's going to turn it into layer with a number. From here, I can start to move around that blue that we filled it in as. Now, instead of it being more blue behind it, you get this little checkerboard pattern. If ever you see a checkerboard pattern, that simply means that it's transparent. There's no color at all. It's not white, black, or anything. It's just a transparent nothingness that's behind it from here. And so from here, I can move my blue around, or I can place it back right where I want it to be from here. If I do want to make a new layer on top of this, I can lock down my layer 0 again by hitting the little lock for this one. This way I can't accidentally move it around again. It doesn't give me the warning. Or to make a new layer, I can click on the little create new layer icon at the bottom of my panel. This will give me a new layer, new number. There's my checkerboard, and notice that it's transparent. Now since this layer is on top of layer 0, if I was to grab my paintbrush tool and start to paint with this, make my brush a little bit larger, everything that I paint on top of this layer is only going to happen inside of layer number 1. The best part about this is if I use my move tool, I can click on things in this layer and move it around. It gets an update and it doesn't affect or change up anything on my background layer. This is the advantage and essence of working in Photoshop. It allows you to add multiple layers without affecting other layers. I can do it again. If I choose a new layer, layer number 2, I'll choose a different color this time. Let's go solid black. Whatever I paint on layer 2 with my brush isn't going to affect anything on the layers that are below those layers. So I can choose my move tool, I can click on the black layer, move it around, and notice that my red layer and my blue layer remain untouched. And so this is a great way of working on multiple different layered options. The other thing I can do is you've got these little eyeball icons. If you've got something in the way and you want to see what it looks like, let's say I don't want to see my black, I can click on the eyeball. This will turn off the visibility of it by turning it off and on. I can do this for any layer that's got an eyeball turned on, and that simply turns on and off the ability to see it. And that comes in handy, especially if you've got lots of different layers and you've got certain things in the way you need to see below it. If I ever want to change the stacking order, right now I've got black on top of the red. I can click on that layer and drag down. You can see a little line will appear between those two layers. And when I let go, now I've got red on top of this one, and that layer is on top of this as well. If ever I need to delete away a layer altogether, let's say I want to get rid of this black layer, notice that I've got it highlighted and selected. I can hit delete. It'll ask me, are you sure you want to do this? We'll say okay, and that layer is gone. Another quick way of deleting it is simply selecting the layer and hitting the delete key, and that layer is gone as well. Changing up your blending modes is another fun way of having layers interact with one another. Let's create a new layer. I'm going to add on just some color, so we'll paint some red on this layer. And we'll do a new layer on top of this. And this new layer, we'll let that be kind of a bright yellow. All the bright colors today. Now by default, whenever I paint, if you're on top of one color, the normal setting is going to cover it up. And so the blending mode here is set to normal. However, if I've got a layer selected and I change it to something else like multiply, you can see how it's going to take those colors and it's going to blend with whatever's below it. In this case, it's no longer yellow, it's actually taking that yellow and blending it with the blue and even the reds, and you're getting this kind of greenish effect. Now, depending on the blending mode you have, you can get some very drastic results. Each one of these kind of has its own different algorithm. Different colors, different blending modes, and even different stacking order can sometimes give you some really fun, almost unexpected uses. Some of these I use a little bit more often than others, but typically by default, I'll always keep it on my normal painting mode simply because I know exactly what I'm getting. So that's blending modes and how you can change them from there. You can also drop your opacity of a layer. With that layer selected, if I wanted to see less of the yellow, be able to see a little bit more below it, everything on this layer is now set to be right at about 40%. And nothing can go above that 40% from here. If I bring it back up to here, if ever you want to change the name of a layer, now by default it's just going to give it a number to it, but if I wanted to call this my red layer, I can double click the name of it, type in red, and then double click the name of this one, and rechange the name of that layer. As we've done with all of these other ones, you can lock it down. So I can lock down the yellow and not be able to do anything with this. In this case, you can see it has a little bar barring me from moving or painting on top of it. There's also other kinds of locks you can do. Things like if I wanted to lock the transparency of the pixels or being able to paint on it. In this case, I can't paint on it, but I can choose my move tool and I can move it around. Or if I wanted to lock the movement of it, I can't move it now. It automatically just keeps it or selects another layer, but I can paint to it. Or if I want to change the size of the artboard or just lock it down together. So locking and unlocking happens at this particular stage. Some of the final things you can do with layers is be able to manage them and group them together. If I wanted both of these to become one solid layer, let's say I have this yellow and red, but I don't want them on two layers, I can hold down the Shift key, select both of those, then the layer options can be found at the top right-hand corner of your layers panel. From here, these are all of the different things you can do to the layer. The most important ones are down here. With those two layers selected, I can tell it to merge those layers together by doing Command E or selecting this. And this will bring those both together merged into one single layer. Now this comes in handy for taking multiple layers and bringing them down to one manageable layer. Of course, I can always undo that if necessary, or I can flatten the image by choosing Flatten. This will take everything and flatten it down to one solid layer by itself. Remember, at any time, if you make a mistake, you can always go up to Edit and Undo, or Command Z, and that will back out. A final thing you can do to manage your layers is by grouping your layers together into a folder. I'm going to select both my yellow and red, click on the folder icon. This will put it together in a little group, and I can expand that group to be able to see those. I'm going to call these my colors. Double click on that to change the name of it. Whenever you're working on really complex illustrations that's got sometimes hundreds of different layers, putting things together in folders and groups makes it much more simple to manage and see exactly what you want. You're going to see me use this from time to time on various different things. Sometimes I use them more often than others, but knowing that they're there and that I can use them does come in handy. As with all of these, remember, if you save up your documents, save them as a Photoshop document. Under the Photoshop format, this will keep all of your layers together. Otherwise, if you were to save it as a JPEG or even a PNG, sometimes you'll lose all of these and it will flatten your image. This is what I mean by flatten. Take all those layers and convert them down to one solid layer by itself.